Assalamu alaikum. So today I want to discuss this story of Ibrahim with you. That's in chapter 2, verse 260. So let me read the ayat with you, and then we'll discuss it in some detail. He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ أَرِنِي كَيْفَ تُحْيِي الْمَوْتَى. And when Ibrahim said, My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. قَالَ أَوَلَمْ تُؤْمِنْ. He said, Do you not believe or do you not have faith? قَالَ بَلَى وَلَكِنْ لِيَطْمَئِنَّ قَلْبِي. He said, Certainly, but I want my heart to feel tranquil. قال فخذ أربعة من الطير فصرهن إليك. He said, then take 4 birds, فصرهن إليك. Roughly, we'll translate this as cause them to incline to you, but I'm going to explain it a little bit more in a second. ثم جعل على كل جبل منهن جزءا. Then place upon every mountain a portion of them. ثم دعهن يأتينك سعيا. Then call them and they will come to you running. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ اللَّهَ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. And know that Allah is mighty and wise. So there are several different points we want to talk about in this verse. Number one, let's start with, why did Ibrahim ask this question? Why did he say, Rabbi arini kayfa tuhil mauta? My Lord, show me how you give life to the dead. Well, if we look at the context of this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, if we go to the verses before it, I think that helps to explain it. So if we let's start with verse 258. We're going to actually need eventually to go back to 257, but we're going to skip that for right now. I just want to start at 258. So if we look at 258, 259, and 260, which is the verse that we just read, we'll see that all these 3 verses coincide with the idea of giving life and causing death. So he says, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَّ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي رَبِّهِ أَنْ آتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ. So this is 258. Have you not looked at, or have you not seen, the one who debated or argued with Ibrahim concerning his Lord, an atahu Allahul mulk, because Allah gave him al-mulk or dominion? إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّيَ الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ. When Ibrahim said, My Lord is the one who gives life and causes death. قَالَ أَنَا أُحْيِي وَأُمِيتُ. He said, I am the one who gives life and causes death. قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق. Ibrahim said, then Allah brings the sun from the east. فأتي بها من المغرب. Then you bring it from the west. فبهت الذي كفر. So the one who did kufr was shocked or overcome or overwhelmed. والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. And Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So let me point out a couple things about this verse real quick. So number one, when Ibrahim said to the person, Rabbi alladhi yuhyi wa yumit, my Lord is the one who gives life and causes death. And the man responded, or the person responded, Qala ana uhyi wa umit. He said, I am the one who gives life and causes death. Notice how Ibrahim, right after that, changed the subject. Qala فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ. He changed to saying, then Allah brings the sun from the east, you bring it from the west. So not only did he change the subject, he changed from saying, my Lord, Rabbi, and to saying Allah. Okay, now why was that the case? So we're going to talk about that in one second. But first I want to explain, how is it that this person can say, I am the one who gives life and causes death? And how might this have caused some doubt in Ibrahim's mind? So I think when you start at 258 and you go to 259 and then 260, it makes sense why Ibrahim asked Allah, Arini kayfa tuhyil mauta. Show me how you give life to the dead, right? Because in 258, he just had an argument or a debate with this person where this person said, I am the one who gives life and causes death. And then Ibrahim didn't keep going with that subject. He switched the subject. So perhaps at that moment, he wasn't sure how to respond to this. So that's why when he asks Allah, he says, show me how you give life to the dead. He didn't say, Arini annaka tuhyil mauta. He didn't say, show me that you give life to the dead. Show me how. So Ibrahim asked about the howness, how you give life to the dead, right? So how is it that this man could say that? And why would that be something that causes doubt in the mind of Ibrahim or makes him have this question about how do you give life to the dead? Well, if we think about the concept of life and death in the Quran, it's not all uniform. And what I mean by that is, usually when we think about the concepts of life and death, we think about it in a physical sense. But in the Quran, the concepts of life and death are not uniform, meaning they don't always mean the same thing. They mean different things. So, for example, let's go to this verse in Surah Al-Ma'idah to show this example. So that's going to be chapter 5, verse 32. So in chapter 5, verse 32, he says, من أجل ذلك كتبنا على بني إسرائيل أنه من قتل نفسا بغير نفس أو فساد في الأرض فكأنما قتل الناس جميعا. He says, because of that, we prescribed and wrote upon Bani Israel that whoever kills a soul not in recompense for another soul or corruption in the earth, then it is as if he killed all of humanity. وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا, and the one who brings it to life. I want you to really pay attention to that wording, because people might translate this verse as saying the one who saves a soul, and that could be potentially some of the meaning of the word of the phrase, right? There could be different ways to bring a soul to life. One of them could be saving a soul, perhaps, right? But the interesting thing about this wording is that the wording itself just says وَمَنْ أَحْيَاهَا, the one who brings the soul to life, brings it to life, right? فَكَأَنَّمَا أَحْيَا النَّاسَ جَمِيعًا, then it is as if that person brought all of humanity to life. Okay, so here the concept of bringing a soul to life is contrasted with killing a soul. So bringing a soul to life can have multiple different layers of meaning. So when this person here says, in debating with Ibrahim, Ana uhyi wa umit, I give life and cause death. Perhaps one way to think about that is he's drawing on the inherent ambiguity in the terms life and death. So the terms life and death in the Quran have an ambiguity to them. Ambiguity means they're not always clear what they're referring to just from the word. You have to look at the context to see what they're referring to. So another example is in Surah Al-An'am, verse, I believe, 122. Let me just double check that for you real quick. Where Allah tells us about the one that He gives life. Yes, Surah Al-An'am, so Surah 6, verse 122. He says, أَوَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ كَمَنْ مَثَلُهُ فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ لَيْسَ بِخَارِجٍ مِنْهَا. He says, is then the one who was dead, so he refers to this person as dead, Maytan, is then the one who was dead, and we brought him to life, and we made for him a light by which he walks amongst people. Is that person's example like the one who is fi dhulumat, who is in many forms of darkness and will not come out of it? So isn't that beautiful? He describes this person as being dead and being brought to life, and then being given a light by which he walks amongst people. And he compares that person to a person who is in many states of darkness and is not coming out from it. So you see how there he's talking about a person being dead and being brought to life and giving a light and then walking with that amongst people. He's talking about a person who was spiritually dead and he brought him to life. So the idea of life and death in the Quran is ambiguous in the sense of just from the word itself, you don't always know what's being referred to until you study the context, right? So here, when Ibrahim is arguing with this person and he says, Rabbi alladhi yuhyi wa yumit, my Lord is the one who gives life and causes death. And the person says, Ana uhyi wa umit, I give life and cause death, right? The person perhaps is drawing upon the inherent ambiguity of the terms life and death. And so Ibrahim perhaps doesn't know how to respond to that. That's why later he says, Kayfa tuhyil mauta, because there's different ways of giving life and causing death. You see my point? You look in the Quran, there's different ways of giving life and causing death. So Ibrahim says, Kayfa tuhil mota. How you give life and cause death. Another thing about this verse 258 is why did he switch from Rabbi, my Lord, to saying فَإِنَّ Allah? Then truly it is Allah. So one perspective on that could be that Rabb perhaps indicates a closeness when he says Rabbi, my Lord. It indicates a more close and intimate and personal attachment because the word Rabb in Arabic is related to Yurabbi in its root. Yurabbi. Yurabbi means to grow, to nourish, to cultivate something. This term actually in the Qur'an, or the same root word, is used with our parents. It said, Kama rabbayani saghiran. Just as they have rabbayani, just as they have grown and nourished and cultivated and helped me develop rabbayani saghiran as a child, as someone who is small. So this word Rabb has within the meaning of the root of it to grow and to develop, right? So it's related to it, or it's used for our parents. So there's a very personal feeling about that word, right? So he says, Rabbi alladhi, my Lord is the one who. So there's a personal intimacy, closeness, and just this overall feeling of being attached to the one that is nourishing and developing you. Now, when the man answers with this ambiguous statement that Ibrahim doesn't know how to respond to, perhaps he experienced some distance there, right? He had this moment of like doubt or questioning, or felt some distance. He didn't feel as close. At first he was attached to my Lord, but now he experiences this situation where he doesn't know how to answer the question, and he feels some distance. So he switches to Allah. He switches to the more general concept of Allah. And there's a really beautiful lesson in this, I think, because we're being told in different places in the Quran to follow the millah of Ibrahim, to follow the way or the religion of Ibrahim. And so that's a really beautiful example to show us how we can experience different situations where we go through these levels of being closer or being farther away in our feelings about Allah, right? So sometimes we really feel that Rabbi, my Lord, my sustainer, the one who's cultivating and nourishing me, who's giving me everything that I need to grow. And then sometimes we experience certain situations, certain questions might come up, or certain things we can't answer, or we just go through these different moods where we still have Allah, but we don't feel Rabbi. See how beautiful that is? So, but then look at the argument that he switched to. He said, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ فَأْتِي بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. So then truly Allah brings the sun from the east, you bring it from the west. Now, why did he switch to that form of argument? So again, as with anything in the Quran, there could be multiple different layers, but let me present a certain perspective on this. It's related to how do we think about Allah, or how do we define Allah. So for me, how I think about Allah and what makes sense to me about Allah is, first of all, whatever is behind all of this, the intelligence, that entity, whatever it is, everything that we use to describe it is not it, right? It's just what we have within our resources, and what we can reach, the words that we can reach, the words that have been given to us, to be able to try to describe this in human language that makes sense to us. But that's not the reality of what that particular thing is, whatever that is. It's that unknowable, ineffable essence behind everything. But even me using those words, unknowable, ineffable, essence, all these words, intelligence, the divine intelligence, all these different words are only human language to describe something that's beyond human perception to understand. So perhaps we can say Allah, one of the ways to think about Allah is being the law, like LAW, the law or the intelligence behind everything, right? That we see manifested in the regularities of the universe, right? That we see manifested in like these laws of physics that we're aware of, how everything interconnects, and more. Like some other people have described it, and I like this way of describing it because I think this goes together with what I'm saying, is like Allah is a higher form of consciousness, which relates to connecting with the universe and the laws of the universe and all of those things and how it all relates to each other. So perhaps what Ibrahim is doing here, or one way to think about it, is the person responds with a concept that is ambiguous. The ideas of life and death are ambiguous, right? They can mean different things. So Ibrahim then switches to talking about the larger universe and the laws of the universe. So he's saying, my Lord gives life and causes death. The person says, I give life and cause death. So Ibrahim is like, okay, cool. You give life and cause death. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ فَأْتِ بِهَا مِنَ الْمَغْرِبِ. So then Allah brings the sun from the east, then you bring it from the west. So in other words, okay, there's laws of physics that govern this universe. You then change the laws of physics. Okay, if you give life and cause death, change the laws of physics. Make things run different. فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. So the person who did kufr, what does kufr mean? Kafara, the root meaning of it means taghtiya, which means to cover something. But I think of kufr from that definition as meaning to cover the truth. So kufr is often translated as disbelief. It doesn't necessarily mean, if you study the Arabic meaning of the word, just that you don't believe what someone else believes, but it means you cover and oppose what's known to be true. And that's why one really beautiful definition that I read of kufr that I want to share with you is someone described it as موقف علن واع ضد أمر ما. That it is a conscious public position against any matter. So anytime you look at all the different elements, موقف علن, it's a public position. Wa'in, it's conscious, so you're aware of it. Diddu amrin ma, and it's where you oppose any particular thing. So anything that you oppose publicly, consciously, right, then that is kufr of that thing. So kufr is connected with opposition and covering the truth. So here, فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ, the one who did kufr, the one who was in opposition of the truth, was astonished and shocked and just overwhelmed. Wallahu la yahdi al-qawm al-zalimin. And Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So this is a really beautiful verse to start with in our discussion of 260 because it sets the tone and the context to show that the context is connected with Ibrahim having this discussion about life and death and perhaps not being able to answer that sufficiently. And then he goes to 260. We go to 260, and that's when we find him asking, Arini kayfa tuhyil mauta. Show me how you give life to the dead. Okay, so that's the first point that we want to look at. That's 258. Now, when you go to 259, you notice this theme of life and death and how you bring the dead to life is continued in 259. So in 259 it says, أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها, or like the one who passed by a town while it was falling down upon its trellises. قال أن يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. He said, how, I'm going to loosely translate it, but then I'm going to talk about this word that's being translated as how. He said, how will Allah bring this to life after its death? Okay, so the one passed by the town, right? And he said it was fallen down upon its trellises. And he said, how, or the word is anna in Arabic, how would Allah bring this to life after its death? Now, before I explain that word, I want to notice the flow of the context. So the flow of the context, and this is something that we're going to unpack more as we talk about this story more. It's probably going to take us a few videos to truly unpack this whole story in 260. Today, I just kind of want to set the tone of the context. So let's look at the flow of the ideas. So if you start from 257, which is the verse that we haven't read yet in the context, it tells us, Allahu waliyyu ladhina amanu يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. Allah is the wali of those who have believed. He takes them from many forms of darkness to light. Now, what does the word wali mean? The word wali is often translated as a friend, a protector, supporter, a helper. It's translated in a lot of different ways. This word is more like a guardian or a caretaker than a friend. And that's something that we'll unpack when we start putting together this whole context, which is going to be in one of our other videos about this verse, because it's going to be very relevant to understanding Ibrahim's question. So I'll leave that for one of our other videos, but I just wanted to point that out real quick, that the term wali is something deeper than just a friend. But as a wali, as Allah being the wali of those who have believed, what does he describe himself as? يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. He brings them out from many forms of darkness to light. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتِ. And those who do kufr, those who consciously oppose the truth, their awliya are at-taghut. Which is basically, to sum it up, anything that causes us to transgress beyond the limits of Allah. يُخْرِجُونَهُم مِّنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. They take them from light to many forms of darkness. أُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ. Those are the companions of the fire. هُمْ فِيهَا خَالِدُونَ. They dwell therein forever. Okay? So now, 257, pay attention to this. This is really interesting to look at the context. 257 speaks about Allah taking those who have believed from darkness to light, and those who are at-taghut taking their awliya, right, from light to darkness, the opposite direction. Then in 258 starts with Alam Tara, don't you see? Now look at how that's connected. That's beautiful, because he could have just started off 258 by saying something like Haja Ibrahim fi Rabbihi alladhi atahu Allahul mulk, or something like that. That the one who we gave dominion to argued with Ibrahim about his Lord. He could have just started off like that. But he didn't start off like that. He started off with, don't you see? Alam tara, or have you not seen? As if this verse 258, where Ibrahim is talking to this person about life and death, is connected to the previous verse, which is talking about Allah taking those who believe from darkness to light, and those who are at-taghut doing the opposite, taking their awliya from light to darkness, right? So that's 257. Then he says in 258, Alam tara, have you not seen? As if he's telling us, here is an example. Here is an example of the idea of going from darkness to light or light to darkness. And the example that's given is the debate about giving life and causing death. Okay? So when you pay attention to this context, it flows together. And it's all related to and connected to, and will help us explain verse 260. So 258 starts off with Alam tara, have you not seen? And then 259 says Aw, or kalladhi, or like the one. Okay? Notice how they all flow together. So 257 talks about going from darkness to light. Then 258 starts with Alam tara, have you not seen? Then when he says have you not seen, he says Ila alladhi, to the one who, or have you not looked to the one who, alladhi, right? And then 259 starts with Aw kalladhi, or like the one who. So you see how they all flow together? So then when we go to 260, we have to think about this whole context of how it all fits together. And that's something we'll do in our upcoming videos, inshallah. But this is just setting the groundwork to understand it. So this person here, we're going to read just a portion of this and discuss this word and the difference between what he said and what Ibrahim said. And then we'll pick up in our next couple videos with the other details of these verses. He says, أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال أن يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. Or like the one who passed by a town while it was fallen down upon its trellises. He said, Anna would Allah bring this to life after its death. So what is Anna? Because sometimes it's translated as how. So different scholars of Arabic, some of them say Anna is a combination of Aina and Kaifa, meaning where and how. So one way to think about that is Anna is not just saying how would Allah bring this to life after its death, but it's saying where would this come from? How and where and in what way? But if we also look a little bit deeper at a couple of the usages of this word in the Qur'an, we can see some of the meaning and some of the feel of it. Because when we study the words of the Qur'an, it's one thing to talk about the meaning of them, and that's important. But also when we look at the context that they're often used in, whatever word we're studying, it gives us a feel of that word. So Anna, for example, let's look at a couple examples. So when Maryam was told about Jesus, that she would have Jesus, look at her response. She says, قالت ربي أنى يكون لي ولد ولم يمسسني بشر. She says, my Lord, أنى. So this word how, where, and in what way, how, where, and in what way, يكون لي ولد, would I have a child, ولم يمسسني بشر, when no human being has touched me. So from that example, you can get the feel of the meaning of the word anna, because what's she saying here? She's saying no human being has touched me, so I haven't experienced the natural means that are necessary to accomplish having a child. There are natural means in place that to have a child needs to be present. These natural means have to be present. So you're telling me and giving me the glad tidings that I'm going to have this child, but I haven't experienced the natural means. So she says, Anna yakunu li walad. How, in what way, where is that possible? How could that even be? It's almost, you even get the feel of it, that it's almost an expression of like denial or just being perplexed, like, Anna, how could this possibly be? So if we just take that example and we look here in this verse and we compare it to what Ibrahim said. So this person says, قال أن, how, what way is this even possible? In what world is this possible? How would this come about? يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها, that Allah would bring the earth to life after, or this town to life after its death. So look at what this person said versus what Ibrahim said. Ibrahim said, Arini, show me, كيف تحيي الموتى. How, كيف, you give life to the dead. Ibrahim didn't say, Arini, أن تحيي الموتى. Show me how, in what way would this even be possible. He didn't say it like that. Now, why is that the case? And there's some other differences. We didn't read the whole verse 259, but we're going to do that. We'll talk about that in the next video. But why is that the case, that Ibrahim's approach to wondering about life and death is different than this person's approach to wondering about the same subject? And their answers, as we're going to read, turn out to be the same as well. So tune in next time for a conclusion, not necessarily a conclusion, but a further discussion of that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.